Niall, thanks so much for being here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so good to see you again.
It is great to see you. It's great to meet you, Richard. It's exciting to be here across the pond.
Yes, I'm so pleased to see you. It's almost like I've known you for a long time, but we've actually never met. So, g'day.
G'day. One of my favorite things.
Now, we first met, I think you said it was about 6 years ago, at a Sydney workshop that was being run. And that's when I was first introduced to coherence therapy in a big way and memory reconsolidation. It was an absolute eye-opener for me, and we've been talking about it ever since. It's been an absolute revolution.
Yes, it's so not so much the thing that I studied, but I came across Bruce in other work in neuroscience and various things and some of the other conferences. So suddenly there was, and actually, unbeknownst to you guys were the connectors between Matt and I. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
No,
that was an exciting workshop because first of all, it was so great to be meeting with so many folks from Australia many of whom were being introduced to coherence therapy for the first time. And then to see people bringing in, that was one of the moments where I got a taste of people bringing in a whole number of other forms of experiential psychotherapy that they were coming from, and they were bringing those skills into their coherence therapy work.
Yeah, it was so exciting just to see the transformation happen right there in a workshop. It was, and I think you've got a video of one of those sessions, which was quite remarkable. We might have a link to that in the show notes for people to have a look at.
That's great, because they're always so useful. But I love that, and we talk about it, and I think a lot of people are familiar with the terms, and hopefully they'll, I'm not sure we have to go back to beginner level, but certainly we talk about coherence therapy, and we talk about memory reconsolidation in sort of this rabble and collection. But there are two elements that feed off and inform each other. I mean, one's a mechanism, and one's then a therapeutic interpretation of that utilizes that mechanism.
Yes, exactly.
I wonder if that's somewhere we could start, just to clarify. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we can do that. I make a point of always making it clear that I'm not an expert on memory reconsolidation. The two of you most certainly are. Many of your listeners probably are more of an expert on the scientific and neuropsych specifics of memory reconsolidation than I am. I always make a point of keeping my focus on just the practice of psychotherapy, and memory reconsolidation certainly informs much of my thinking. And when I'm looking for that point of transformation, which in coherence therapy we often refer to as juxtaposition, I'm always keeping in mind that that's the goal, and that's what we're really looking for. But my specialty is more on the practice than the theory, really.
So I'll jump in. Thanks for saying that. I put you on the spot, but let's take you off the spot and just saying, yes, memory reconsolidation is a neurobiological mechanism that enables us to understand the nature of the way in which we can have immediate and permanent change in the nature of the way we engage with current experience. So cool, there you go. But what happens then is, what are wonderful ways in which you can utilize that capacity of neurobiological function? How do you harness that and enable that opportunity? Because one of the problems with CBT, wonderful as it is that it is very slow and drawn out. It uses the competitive form of neurobiological mechanism. So if that covers that footage, now let's leap into this way you access this and utilize it and engage the therapist and the client in this experience.
Yeah. I mean, what I love about coherence therapy in particular is that it has such a specific way of setting up the circumstances to create that memory reconsolidation experience. So it's just really put into very clear words so that I can think about it as I'm going through a session, how we get in touch with a deeply held implicit meaning that's held in the emotional brain, right? And the client, when they are in that, in the course of the session, they are just in it. They're not thinking about what does this mean, or how did I get here, or how could this shift? They just get into that world of meaning. And for me as the therapist, I'm going in there really deeply with them, but I'm also holding this second track of awareness, which is being aware that this is a meaning that they're holding, and it's connected to some original symptom that we identified as our target of change at the beginning of the session. And I'm holding in mind that that what's really needed here is for them to be deeply in their world of meaning, and then give them this surprising experience, what we call mismatch or juxtaposition, where I bring their attention to some part of their reality that they know is true that doesn't fit with the schema, doesn't fit with what they're expecting when they're in that implicit world of meaning. And in that moment, they often have this very surprising, sometimes people will laugh, oftentimes people will laugh. We call that the coherence laugh, although I think Bruce Ecker has never actually written about that. I've heard him, I first got that term from him. He pointed out there's this particular laugh when people say, wait, that's crazy, or that makes no sense, or that doesn't work, right? Sometimes it's laughter. Sometimes they just look hugely relieved. Sometimes
it's sort of like realizing your own,
that comes right there. Yeah.
It's sort of realizing your own silliness is one of the things that I experienced when
realizing your own silliness, and it's your own silliness that you never even realized you had until now. At first, the therapist helped you get in touch with that being your meaning, and then you realized how silly it is. And you didn't even, it always sort of felt true to you, but it was so sort of part of your inner working, you never noticed it before. Yeah. And now you notice it, and now we can bring the next piece of the work, of course, is to maintain awareness. Now that it's been brought to the light of day and sort of exposed for not being really true, not holding up to scrutiny, now you want to keep them in touch with that between sessions. That's why we create a between session task that keeps their conscious mind now aware of this. So as they go through certain situations that would usually evoke that meaning or that knowing, now they'll see it evoking that knowing, and they'll realize it's false. It's not actually true. I don't have to, which means I don't have to go into the whole state or go into the whole behavior that I used to always go into in response to it.
Yeah. Now, although that transformation can happen, very rapidly, sometimes it takes a little while to get to that place where you're making the conscious juxtaposition. So can you talk to us a little bit about the setup? So this could be a very brief therapy, but sometimes the briefness of that therapy has had a long runway.
Yes, absolutely. That is completely true. Right. So there are a number of steps that there are a number of sort of pieces we need to get in order before we know that we are in that zone where we can create the juxtaposition. If we do it too early, then it may come off as just a counteractive, have you ever considered this nice thing, right? Why don't you think about this? Then it becomes just something that their cognitive mind will look at and say, well, yeah, that's true, but it doesn't really profoundly shift anything. So
that's just sort of an alternative or
then it just seems like an alternative, and the cognitive mind can sort of hold the alternative and unconsciously still hold this other deep knowing. So first we want to get very, very clear, and at least now this is the coherence therapy way of doing it. We want to get very clear about what the consciously experienced suffering is that the client has, right? That's the suffering that they come into therapy with. I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I get angry all the time and yell, whatever it might be. I procrastinate, can't stop overeating. There's a whole range of either experiences or behaviors. And we want to find out what their suffering is, how they experience suffering in response to this experience or in response to this behavior. And then we want to, and this is where the experiential work really comes in. This is where we want to, we spend sometimes quite a bit of time, sometimes multiple sessions, setting up various experiences that will help them bump into reasons why they're doing that thing. And those reasons are going to be the implicit meanings and knowings that we're looking for. Right?
Yeah.
There's an interesting, I'm thinking back when I've done this before, I've done this thought, and it was actually because the wonderful thing about all therapies is that they're a natural thing, but we just lose touch with them, and we need therapists to help us to co-engage these stuff. But I was 20, thereabouts 20, and going out with a girl, and I would always fall in love instantly with everybody, but mostly just one person at the same time, at the one time. But things were going a bit not good. I called her, I didn't know where she was, and I started getting all worried, and I started exhibiting all these anxieties and fears. And I rang the home and I said, get her to call me as soon as she comes in. I really want to do. I slept by the phone. Anyway, sometime the next morning, we finally got in contact, and I said, "Oh, look, I'm so worried." And she just said, "Richard, we're not married." And it was just like, oh. So I had this whole behavior pattern that was based on a belief that she loved me or had to love me or whatever I had to be. And it was instant.
That was a moment that something just opened in your mind, right? You had a certain expectation, and she said the right thing in the right moment that suddenly opened your mind to, oh, relationship doesn't have to be this super merged, super connected.
And that thing you're saying, I couldn't hold the two ideas in my head at the same time.
Right.
And that's
right. So we've all had experiences that these experiences happen at certain moments. You remember that one, right? At certain moments, these experiences of juxtaposition or of transformation certainly happen spontaneously at moments throughout our life. And the question is, how does the therapist really harness that to make it happen as efficiently and effectively as possible? And that, like I said, can take a while. So you want to get the person into the experience, and of course there are levels of meaning and levels of knowing. So we want to get them to the deepest level we can possibly get and have them really feeling it, and then they're primed and ready for this mismatch or juxtaposition experience.
Now, sometimes finding that experience to use in the juxtaposition can be difficult, and it might be worth mentioning it doesn't need to be the opposite experience, does it? It just needs to be contrasting.
It needs to be contrasting, correct.
So tell us a little bit about your process when it is difficult to find that thing that is contrasting.
Well, I tell people all the time when I'm working with supervisees about this kind of thing, the vast majority of the time, I don't ever come up with a deliberate juxtaposition at all in coherence therapy. The vast majority of the time, it happens spontaneously in between sessions, that if I keep every session, I give them a between session task that keeps them in touch with whatever knowing or awareness has come. And they very often will say, for the first 3 days, it felt true. And then on the 4th day, this thing happened, which might be akin to Richard's story just now. And suddenly it didn't feel true anymore. And so a lot happens spontaneously between sessions.
This natural emergence, I sort of summarize a lot of therapy down to creating the opportunity and the appropriate circumstances. And it is that our troubles, our difficulties, our traumas, our upsets that you were talking about, they actually do hold us and restrain us and sort of blinker our vision. And I'm imagining that, I know with myself, this is the feeling as a therapist. It's sort of say, well, that's okay. Let's just see what we can see together, rather than saying, I'm seeing it for you. And I hear that as a beautiful thing, and you're allowing them to do that.
And a big component of it is patience on my part, simultaneously being very creative, but also being patient and not forcing it. If it's a forced juxtaposition, usually not only falls flat, but you can feel like, oh, I just missed it's hard to go back sometimes.
Right.
So I often will just be patient, and there are moments where it suddenly just opens up, like just right in front of you. You just say, oh my gosh, it's like and here in this country where we play a lot of baseball, a nice slow pitch just suddenly comes your way, and you just can't resist but go for it then. And
so there's a certain aspect of not working too hard.
Not working too hard. Correct. Right.
Yeah.
And then what I've come to realize over time is that many of the other forms of therapy that I've highlighted on this new website that we've just released, which is experiential psychotherapies.com, many forms of therapy have some version of this going on. Some of them are more aware of exactly what they're going for, and that they are talking about using different language, talking about some form of a juxtaposition or a transformation experience. Others less so, but they all they're all ticking the boxes to create the situation or the circumstances that allow this kind of transformational change to occur.
Yeah, and we did a wonderful magazine a number of years ago, just demonstrating how this process of memory reconsolidation can be identified in so many different sorts of therapies. Having said that, I think learning coherence therapy, because it seems to me that coherence therapy has just taken the very essence of the neurobiological process and very carefully tracked that in a therapeutic process. And if you learn that, you don't necessarily, need to stick to it. But in the learning of coherence therapy, then you'll know very well how the mechanisms work in other forms of therapy. At least that's what I found for myself.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I loved about Unlocking the Emotional Brain, the book that Bruce Ecker and Robin Tissick and some other people wrote several years back. It's been some years now, I guess, 2013, I think. One of the reasons I love that book is because people from all sorts of different schools of experiential psychotherapy will read that book and will say, oh, yes, that's what I've been doing, but I didn't exactly have that wording for it. And people will often tell me that they felt that they got better at whatever their school is, fill in the blank, EMDR or AEDP or ISTP, or they felt that, oh, I got even better at doing what I was already doing once I really grokked that concept of memory reconsolidation.
Yeah, those fundamentals. It was strange. The metaphor for this was just something I was doing this morning to fill in a little bit, and there was a guy, a musician, as Matt is, and he was playing a very basic chord progression of a song by Paul Simon, 50 Ways to Lose a Lover. And then he said, no, but this is the way, these are the sounds that aren't there. And then he started adding augmented chords and ninths and things, and all these variations. Now, and it's this difference that we have through therapies. Some are playing with the basic chords, some are playing with all the augmented frilly ones, but they're missing the basics. And this interactive conversation that we have between us, again, returning back to what makes it full and rich. And certainly I agree with Matt that's actually sort of what Bruce did. He kept on bringing the refining the richness into a single framework, which is really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, what continually amazes me is that we've known from Bruce's work and others the process, the underpinning process of memory reconsolidation. We have coherence therapy, and yet I'm continually coming across therapist after therapist who have no idea about this. And so I'm very glad that you're continuing to be the educator and you're getting the word out there. Just tell us a little bit about how you see this sort of this knowledge catching on with therapists out there.
Well, I think there are two ways that it's catching on. So there are two tracks. One track is more the track that Bruce and Robin and others are following with Unlocking the Emotional Brain. They're really giving people the meta understanding, which was fascinating to both of you and many of your listeners, the meta understanding of what's happening on a neurobiological level, right? What's going on here, and what's our meta theory? The other track, which is the track that I've been working on more myself, is is, so what are the practices that seem to bring this about? And that's why what we've done with our site is we've contacted a whole number of these schools. There are about a dozen so far, and the number is just, there's so many experiential schools. We'll spend the rest of our lives, I'm sure, tracking them all down and bringing them onto the site. But we started out with 12 big ones that are fairly well established and fairly well known. And I find for myself that every time I watch a video from video tutorials from any of these schools, I come away with it. I come away from that experience, and then my next week of working with clients, I'll have some idea that keeps coming back to me that just, I think, oh, I never quite incorporated that into my work before. And I find that it just helps me get to that juxtaposition, transformation moment all that much more quickly and effectively. So there are two tracks, really, right? There's the more theoretical track, and then there's this practical track, which is what I'm excited for now, is to have this site where people can view tutorials from a whole range of different experiential schools and start to get where the crossovers are and where the differences are.
Right, fantastic.
So we'll have the link in the show notes, but that's experiential therapies, all one word.
It's actually experiential.
Psychotherapies, sorry.
There's a hyphen in the middle, psychotherapies.com.
Right. Experiential psychotherapies.com. Log in, everybody.
There we go.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're sort of coming near to the end, Niall. I'm just wondering if there's something that you'd like to leave our listeners with as we wrap up.
Well, what I'd like to leave your listeners with, this is something that I think about a lot, which is that something that I've always sensed would be part of my life's work would be to break down there's two challenges. One challenge is that when people get into one of these forms of therapy, they tend to get so focused on it because you really want to get good at it and you really want to specialize. So you go to workshops and trainings and conferences and you join the listserv and you talk about it, which is all wonderful. And in doing so, you can lose touch with the fact that there are so many other amazing ideas and so many other amazing schools that might be only a certain bit different from what you're doing, but you just stop looking beyond it. So I'm really excited to get people looking past the boundaries of what they're already doing. The other thing, which is almost even bigger, is that for all the publicity that some of these schools have gotten, internal family systems and AEDP and ISTDP and emotional focused therapy, they've all become huge. It's still shocking to me that only a very small percentage of therapists worldwide are aware of them. The vast majority of therapists still don't know that it's even an option to work experientially.
Yeah.
When I tell not just cognitive behavioral therapists and not only psychodynamic therapists, but all sorts of people who call themselves eclectic, when I say I work experientially, they don't really know what I mean. They don't. It's not that they don't know how I work. They just say how I work experientially. They just don't know what it means to work experientially. So I'm really, really excited to bring more practitioners globally into all these rich and dynamic ways of working experientially.
Yes, it's so important to be able to speak. I mean, communication is simply the act of having common agreement to the meaning of things.
Yes.
And it's fascinating when we strike something. And of course, there are a few, of course, that come to mind. Mind is another one that people actually have no idea. I spend a lot of time talking about hope and curiosity, and this sort of thing where people say, "Oh, I don't know what that is," and then you ask another question, and they go, "Oh, there's more. Oh, I didn't know." So it's a really beautiful task. And see, me and my great grayness, I look at the great not grayness. And I go, yay, you guys have got time to do this. So I'm very excited about this. And I hope you get something done before I shuffle off. So,
It is exciting work. And Niall, thank you so much for dropping in and letting us know where things are at with you, and certainly with your course material. We will be pointing everyone in that direction. And let's catch up again in 2021.
Would love to do that. Yes, thank you so much to both of you for inviting me, and I look forward to having your listeners visit our site for sure.
Yeah. I very much encouraged from this end. So it's a beautiful thing. Go back and enjoy. I mean, you're going into coolness over there. We're going into sort of desperate warmth over here. So, but that wonderful, there's a juxtaposition that we can separate over space and time. So beautiful.
That Zoom makes really apparent.
Yeah.
Okay, now thanks so much. We'll catch you later.
Thank you,
Bye
guys.
for now. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.